So our next speaker has practiced in hospitals both in Ireland and the UK prior to setting up the Dublin Nutrition Centre back in 2003. Since she qualified, she has tons of experience, various different medical fields, from gut health to eating disorders, to weight management, to oncology and to paediatric nutrition. And it's one of those we're going to be talking about in particular, which is that issue of body weight and managing your relationship with food and body weight, and how to make sure that that relationship is successful and not disordered. So big welcome to registered dietitian Aveen Bannon. Aveen, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with that thing of the balanced, the good relationship with food. Do many people ever actually achieve it, or does everybody carry a guilt about eating the right thing?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I would say a high percentage of people have some form of an emotional relationship with food. I mean, think of, you have a nervous tummy, you can't eat, or some people eat if they're, upset, or there's that kind of element of even, something's happened, give them a cup of tea and something, it'll make them feel better, or, we've always had that a child falls, give them a jelly, that'll make them feel better. So I think, we all have a relationship with food, but it's, I suppose, how healthy it is, or, good versus bad relationship with food. A good relationship with food is, it's not the be all end all of everything. You eat for fuel, you can enjoy your food, you kind of eat by choice, not by what you feel you have to do. You've more relaxed eating, whereas a negative relationship with food might be more kind of, repeated dieting or restricting or overeating. But I would say more so would be shame or guilt around food. So, I shouldn't have eaten that, that kind of aspect. And I'd love to think that we all have good relationships with food, but I think the practical side of things, if you went out and asked on the street, most people would have a little bit of an altered relationship with food in terms of maybe feeling bad at times about what they
Although
eat.
I assume it's difficult to get the balance right, because shame or guilt is a good intention taken too far. It's the sense of, well, I can't decide I'm going to sit down with a pack of biscuits every evening of the week.
Exactly, it's trying to find that middle, it's the grey area. So if you think about a lot of the messages you may have heard yourself over the years about food, like this is good for you, this is bad for you. It's very black and white, okay? So a real dietitian's mantra is there's no such thing as a good or bad food, only a good or bad diet. So, we're kind of really ingrained in that kind of thinking. So that idea of, okay, is a packet of biscuits bad for me if I eat it over a week? Probably not. If I eat a packet every day, yes, it's too much. And how I would think of that is that's displacing the intake of healthier foods. So I would be thinking in terms of what you're going to miss by doing that, as opposed to that was a terrible thing to do. And
there's also big fads and trends in how we define what are the healthy types of food, because there was the low fat trend, there was the low carb trend, there was the Atkins trend.
Since I qualified, right, which was a while ago. Okay. So like in college, we were all the low fat brigade, like really and truly, like it was, I remember my mother telling me, like, don't put butter on your toast, just put marmalade. It was like, keep away from anything to do with fats. And then came the kind of carb thing of carbs are terrible, we need to take them out. Then it was like sugar is toxic. Then it was like, actually fats are okay. Now it's like, oh, we shouldn't be having meat. And then it's like, oh, we shouldn't be having dairy. Like there's this constant cycle. And I kind of feel like I've nearly gone through them all at this point. But there is that element of, we seem to be constantly made to feel guilty about doing something we're doing with food.
So where do we find the right parameters to go by? Is it BMI and calories and that's it?
No. So, in a word. So I would say, BMI is great on a population basis, so you know an idea.
Can you actually explain what body mass index is?
So body mass index is your your calculated your weight based on your height, and it's kind of ideal. We should be roughly between 20 and 25. So, if you're within that, you're kind of, within the norm. There are some people who may be a little bit over but still be healthy. You know what I mean? And it's as unhealthy to be overweight as it is to be underweight. So we don't want people to be kind of too far from that. But really, when you're a dietitian working with somebody, like you do take on board the BMI, but you look at it more on an individual basis in terms of the composition, like their muscle mass, their fat mass, the quality of their diet, their relationship with their diet, their relationship with exercise, with stress management, with sleep. There's a whole myriad of things you look at. You can't just look at someone and say, are they healthy? Somebody can look healthy, but it implies sometimes, I think there's a perception, is like the leaner you are, the healthier you are, and that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes if people are having to every day restrict what they eat and every day over-exercise to maintain a lean weight, that's not a healthy scenario to be in. So it's very much about you know, in terms of looking at health as a whole, there's a myriad of things that we look at. It's not just the numbers, and it's not just looking at calories, because obviously calories, I could eat 2,000 calories a day, but it might all be in packets of biscuits. So
what a time to be alive. Before we go to calories, then go back to one thing with the BMI, because am I right in saying the BMI can also be, you can get weird anomalies. You can have people who are extremely healthy who get high BMIs because of muscle mass rather than fat mass.
Yeah, in athletes you might see that, in particular certain sports. And for example, rugby might be an example of a sport like that, where guys' BMIs might look higher, but they're really, really strong, and they're lean and they're healthy. So, you know, you're not going to try and get their BMI just for that reason. Or you might have, I mean, I'm very tall, so as a female, you know, you look at like weights for heights, like sometimes you don't fall into the parameter. So there's different elements at looking at it. So there's lots of factors to look at, not just one.
What about calories then? Because if you ever pick up a packet of anything, you can read on the back, this is 22% of the daily allowance of whatever it be, and there's everybody is told this is how many calories a man should have in this. Is that a useful guide?
Oh, I'm not a big fan of counting calories, probably because I work an awful lot with people with food issues. So I kind of feel it overemphasizes, and it's overthinking and trying to over-prescribe what you're eating. So you get into this, I have to have this amount of calories at this meal, or I have to have this amount of calories in a day. It's a bit like people counting macros as well. So like macros, like your carbohydrates or your proteins or your fats, they start getting very prescriptive of how much I'm supposed to have every day. Whereas really, I'm more into looking at the portion on the plate, the balance on the plate. You know, there's some days we're hungrier than others. That's okay. We're not machines. We're not necessarily meant to eat the exact same amount of calories every day. So I think it can be useful. I mean, you can pick up two things and go, wow, that one's twice as many calories as this. You know, I might go for this option. But I don't think we should be overthinking it. I'm not a big fan even like, you know, calories in terms of when people start counting them, it can become a little bit of a disordered eating in terms of overthinking it and, you know, over worrying about how many calories they're having in the day.
Are there those who have a difficult relationship with food? Do they resent those who don't? Is there a sense that genetically you're all right, I have to deal with this, you don't?
I think sometimes when people overthink food, they think everyone does. They think everyone thinks the same. They, you know, and how many times have you, like, think of even your family, you'll think of people who go, oh shit, like I ate that last night, I'm going to go for a run, or I shouldn't have had that, or I think people don't even realize they're saying it half the time. It's just like a reactionary thing. It's kind of a cultural thing that we do maybe. But I think there's, you know, genetics there's that kind of movement now. They talk about health at every size, which is kind of the HAZE movement. That kind of idea is more trying to work towards embracing maybe your body shape, your genetics. You know, some people have, I don't know, are taller than others, or like shapes, body shapes, all those things can be a lot on genetics, and we can't alter that. You know what I mean? We can just still eat as healthily as possible.
So what then does, you talked about clients coming into you or patients coming into you with disordered relationships with food. What does an ordered relationship with food look like? What's the target for all?
I don't know, does it even exist? I'm a big fan of the idea of like 80-20. You know, if 80% of your calories are coming from your healthy foods, there's room for 20% window of whatever little, you know, thing that you might like or enjoy. So, you know, it's a bit like looking at the difference between a snack and a treat. You know, a snack is something that provides nutrition and calories as part of your daily eating. A treat is something that may or may not offer nutrition, but you might, you know, enjoy less often. So I think it's kind of, you know, that your day-to-day eating is quite healthy, it's nutritious, but there's room for that little treat to have here and there, or whatever you want to call it. If you don't want to call it a treat, that's okay. But that there's no guilt with having done that, or not feeling like you have to earn it. You know?
But it's culturally difficult, because even if you go into most garages and you just go to pay for your petrol, you have to walk past tens of thousands of empty calories, that the sort of the message is, they're fine.
Well, I don't know. I think most people know that they're not. You know what I mean? And I think that's the hardest for people. You know, if you're on the road and you're tired or you're hungry and it's, you know, you haven't quite got to lunch and you go in and that stuff is there. I mean, when you're hungry, anything looks appetizing. So that's, I think, very hard for people who have those positions where if they're being, you know, if that's in your face all the time, that's quite difficult. You need to be very organized maybe, and maybe, you know, just when you're traveling, if you know you're on the road, bring some healthier snacks in the car so you have options. Bring bottles of water so you have, you know, are able to hydrate yourself. But if your meals are healthy, and there's that kind of element, like if you eat enough at your breakfast, at your dinner, at your, you know, your lunch, you have enough at your snack times, you don't tend to be overly hungry. So it's easier to make a decision about a food choice when you're not overly hungry. You know what I mean? When you're hungry, you'll eat anything.
What about the people who selectively remove, often arbitrarily, a single food? Is there merit in that, or is that an indication?
Unless you medically need to, you know, for example, unless you're celiac and you have to remove foods that containing gluten, or you have like an allergy to something. Yes, but people removing them on the kind of idea that they think it might be healthier, it's always to think about, it's not just about the food, it's what's in the food. So like, let's use an example of, for example, milk. A lot of people are going more to kind of more plant-based or nut milks. And if you take that out, you know, there's the calcium element, but a lot of people might think about the calcium, but there's also protein in it, there's vitamin K in it, there's like magnesium, there's a whole myriad of nutrition and like nutrients in there that people aren't thinking about that they're taking out. So it's always to think about, if you do take one food group out, what are you missing and how are you replacing it?
And how do you know? Because where people say, well, it's important to have a balanced diet, to the layperson, how would you know, yeah, I think I'm okay for vitamin K or carbohydrates?
Because the honest answer is, keep it simple. Like if you look at your plate and your plate has some carbohydrate in the form of, you know, potatoes, rice, pasta, you've got some protein in there, whether it's an animal source or a plant-based source of protein, and you've got colour, you're going to probably tick all the boxes, you know what I mean? Once you have the balance at your meals, you don't have to overthink it, because it actually naturally falls into place. You know, so that's the thing, is I think a lot of people do overthink it, and they're overthinking, you know, the element of, is this good for me? Is that bad for me? As opposed to, does my plate just look balanced? Have I got everything I need there? So people might take away, for example, carbohydrates out of their meal, but then they end up maybe eating too much of one other thing, or they're starving an hour later and they need to have something else. You'd be far better off just having your balanced meal.
And what about the people then who adopt certain styles of eating or diet? So those who are paleo, I will kill it myself and drag it into the kitchen, or the Mediterranean diet. You know, but there are people who say, no, I've finally found the thing.
Yeah, and you know, so the Mediterranean diet, I mean, that is a phenomenally healthy diet. I don't think anybody can argue how healthy that is, kind of in terms of all the kind of balance and nutrients that are in that. But I think when people get into that idea, you're getting into that, you're deciding that something else is negative, that something else is bad. Whereas really, if you don't overthink it, I think we don't need to be as strict and regimented about our food choices.
Difficult, I would have thought, particularly for those who are younger, because the youngest generation now shares images of themselves and each other all of the time. They get often archetypical images of human perfection reflected back to them from social media. What do you say to teenagers and kids about?
It's really tough, and it's something that's, you know, and it's not even just kids and teenagers. It's older people, like, you know, it's older people too. It's like people our age. They are comparing. Like, it's like studies show that like 90% of women compare themselves to images online, and 54% of them do that in a negative way. Okay, but there's also increasing that men are doing that too. So it's not just about women, it's not just about girls, and it's not just about teens. But the thing is, when you're younger, I don't know if you've maybe the emotional maturity to be able to deal with that, and it depends how you're feeling that day, how that will impact on you. And that comes back to what we were talking about earlier on, the thing about genetics. You know, body shapes, like diet trends, body shape trends that are fashionable vary throughout the years, and these kids are trying to, you know, emulate certain, you know, people that they follow, that they want to look like, and that might not be possible for them. So I think that is definitely an added element to it. I mean, you know, our food habits tend to come from home, they come from school, they come from the environment, but I mean, there's no doubting that social media has an impact on it too. Now, it can be positive. Like, I know work-wise ourselves, we do an awful lot more now on social media to get positive messages out there. So, you know, there can be a positive to it. But yeah, it's a worry for our future kind of generation coming in of the images that they're being portrayed.
What about the flip side of that? What do you do if, let's say, you're in a situation where somebody close to you, you believe has become unhealthy? Because in one way you would want to make an intervention if you think they have an unhealthy relationship with food. In the other, it could be the single most insulting and hurtful thing that you could do to them. So
yeah, and you tread really, really carefully. It's like a very, you know, like whether you feel somebody could be under or overeating, or they're they're watching different things. It can be just opening a conversation, saying like, is everything okay? Like, are you feeling okay in yourself at the moment? And make it not about food, to try and open that door of conversation. It can be just like, I've noticed that you're not having this as much, like, are you worried about that? As opposed to it being like, you need to eat this, you know, you have to have your, like, it's that kind of element of just giving them, and they may not like it at the time, but they'll go away, think about it, and maybe come back to you then and go, actually, I am struggling a little bit. And you'll get that kind of element of it. You'll see, particularly with younger kids, because the influence of, as you say, these different trends of cutting food groups out, they hear their friends talking about it, they maybe see something about it, they do it, and they don't really necessarily want to, but they're afraid to eat it then because of what the impact it might have. So it's really trying to help, I suppose, particularly if it's a teen or a kid, that they're not in trouble. It's a case of helping them to go like, how can I help you with this? And you can go to your GP, you can go to Bodywise, you can go to different things to help get that support with that. But the main thing is not being judgmental and to listen.
What about those who decide to take charge of their relationship with food and find it to be unsuccessful? I think about a friend of mine many years ago who went on what I think was called the Cabbage soup diet.
I remember that one.
Yeah, and there was a week of cabbage consumption followed by a complete return to where he had been before. But that has to have, I would have thought, a compounding negative impact where you say, well, I tried it, it didn't work, I'll now surrender.
Yeah, and that's when you get into that yo-yo cycle of dieting. And then I think what happens a little bit with that, well, it can happen, is that people really, really restrict. Then because they've restricted, when they do let themselves have something, it's like a feast or a famine. Effectively, it goes into this kind of cycle back and forth. And, you know, when we get positive feedback from somebody you're working with, it's like, I don't feel like I'm on a diet. Like, that's when you know you've gotten there, that they don't feel like they're on a diet. They come in, they're expected to be told you're only allowed to eat X amount of calories, like this. They expect to be given this very rigid, where you're kind of going, actually just work on the balance. And, you know, it's like, are you getting enough fiber? Are you getting enough protein? What are you getting? Enough calcium? Are you getting enough of all the nutrients you need? And once you're getting enough of everything, the balance falls into place without it being, you're probably eating too much of this or too much of that. Like, there's just a, you know, what are you missing as opposed to what you're adding?
And is it fair to say that if you distill it down, it is the difference between saying, if you do this for X weeks or months, you can return to what you were before, versus
exactly, because with a diet, I suppose a diet kind of implies that there's an end to it sometimes, you know what I mean? It's like, I'm going to do this regime, like, and you know, that's the whole thing with motivation. Like, people always talk about motivation, going, I'm really motivated. It's like, motivation isn't continuous. Like, we don't wake up every day motivated to go, I'm going to go to work today, I'm going to brush my teeth. Like, we don't wake up like that. And people feel with weight management sometimes like, I've got to feel motivated every day, but like, that's, you know, again, we're not machines. Like, it's to go with the flow. And some days, okay, I'm finding this hard today, but I'm going to go for that walk because I know I feel better when I do.
Okay, let me devil's advocate then, because I know people will be looking at this saying, okay, I shouldn't worry too much about BMI, I shouldn't worry too much about calories, I shouldn't worry too much about that. But while there may be negatives to all of them, they do provide a structure. Yes. Somebody's able to say, I do this, I do that, these are the rules by which I live. Shorn of that structure, give us the guidance. What do we do to say, okay, I'm not going to live by a rigid regimen, but I am going to have certain goals?
Regimen, I suppose, I would kind of encourage, I do think it's beneficial, is eating at regular intervals. You know, fueling the body at regular times. So like, that you're eating a breakfast, like, it's really simple, but like, you're having a breakfast every morning. You know, 3 or 4 hours later, you might be having a snack, you're having your lunch, but you have a routine of eating. If you think of lighting a fire. If you light a fire in the morning time, if you drip fuel onto that fire, it'll keep burning all day. Your metabolism is kind of the same. If you leave a long gap, that fire starts to go out, you know, it doesn't work as well. So I would say is that, for me, timing is always a big thing. And I find to people who have maybe more disordered eating, or their eating pattern goes off kilter, they've long gaps between their eating. You'll quite often see that. Or they're trying to be good and they have a very small lunch, they're trying to wait, and like, they're trying to restrict, and then the evening comes, and sure, their body goes, hang on a second, I missed out earlier on. So that regular kind of interval of eating, I think, is important. The other thing I always kind of go with is like, make sure there's colour at every meal. So there's some form of colour at every meal, be it a fruit, a vegetable, a salad, something like that, but there is just colour at each meal. So it could be fruit in your breakfast, like lettuce, tomato in your sandwich, your vegetables every evening, but keep that pattern, there's always colour.
So every meal have a colour and keep the meals regular.
And I think, honestly, if you keep it that simple, it kind of falls into place. But the other thing I would say then is, and like it's a real dietitian thing as well, is like kind of your plate divided into kind of 3, like your protein, carbs and colour. You know, as we were talking about earlier on, just that balance is there. But like, if you keep it really simple, you know, your sleep, stress management, hydration, there's all those different things, it does kind of fall into place. It's that simple, honestly.
Aveen, thank you.